March 17, 1944, outside Reims, France. In a commandeered warehouse 40 miles behind what had once been the Atlantic Wall, Hauptmann Ernst Becker stood over a disassembled American half-track. Its components spread across the concrete floor like the organs of some mechanical beast. The vehicle had been captured intact 3 weeks prior during an ambush near the coast. Wehrmacht command, increasingly desperate to understand how American forces maintained such relentless momentum, had ordered a complete teardown. Becker, 42 years old, had spent 20 years as an automotive engineer in Munich before the war. His hands, scarred from years of machinery, now served the Reich's urgent need to comprehend an enemy whose industrial capacity seemed beyond reason. He knelt beside the disassembled engine block, running his fingers along the casting marks. Behind him, 3 junior mechanics waited, notebooks ready. The March cold seeped through the warehouse's broken windows, but Becker barely noticed. His attention had locked onto something that made no sense. Herr Hauptmann? Unteroffizier Gustav Lang spoke quietly. The young mechanic had joined them from a panzer maintenance unit, his experience with German armor making him invaluable for comparative analysis. The transmission assembly is unusual. Becker stood, joints protesting, and moved to where Lang had laid out the transmission components. What he saw confirmed the unease that had been building since they'd begun the teardown that morning. The parts were machined to tolerances he'd rarely seen even in precision German equipment. But that wasn't what troubled him most. It was the sheer waste of it. Every component showed signs of over-engineering by German standards. Castings were heavier than necessary. Tolerances were tighter than function demanded. The electrical system used copper wiring thick enough for twice the amperage. Ball bearings were precision ground when pressed bearings would have sufficed. The vehicle had been built not to minimum specifications, but as if resources were infinite. "Begin documenting everything," Becker ordered. "I want measurements, weights, material analyses, everything." The mechanics set to work with calipers and micrometers. Becker pulled a cigarette from his dwindling supply, rationed now like everything else in the Reich. He lit it and studied the half-track's skeleton. American forces had begun appearing in France with these vehicles in vast numbers. Intelligence reports suggested they'd produced thousands, perhaps tens of thousands. Yet here was a single vehicle that had consumed more high-quality steel than a German equivalent would have used. Lang approached with his notebook. "The engine displacement is 6.3 liters. The block is cast iron, exceptional quality. No signs of porosity or weak points. They've used chromonickel alloy steel for the crankshaft. The connecting rods are forged, not cast." "Forged?" Becker took the cigarette from his mouth. "All of them?" "All 6, Herr Hauptmann. Each one individually forged and machined." Becker had worked on engine design for Daimler before the war. He knew what Lang's findings meant. Individual forged connecting rods represented hours of additional labor and substantially higher material costs. German manufacturers had switched to cast connecting rods in 1942, accepting slightly reduced durability to increase production volume. These Americans had made the opposite choice. Jeffreter Anton Richter, the oldest of the mechanics at 54, called from where he'd been examining the track assembly. His hands, gnarled from decades of mechanical work, held up a trackpad. "Hauptmann, you must see this." The rubber trackpad was thick, deeply treaded, and showed minimal wear despite evidence the vehicle had seen considerable use. Richter turned it over to reveal the steel cable reinforcement embedded within. "This is vulcanized rubber best quality, and look at the wear pattern. This vehicle has traveled perhaps 800 kilometers, and the pads are barely degraded." Becker examined the pad under the warehouse's weak light. German track systems, increasingly forced to use synthetic rubber of inferior quality, required replacement every few hundred kilometers. He'd seen reports of panzer units immobilized not by enemy action but by disintegrated tracks. This American pad looked ready for thousands more kilometers. "Check the spare parts inventory," he said. Lang moved to the vehicle's storage compartments, which they'd emptied earlier. He consulted his list. 2 complete spare trackpad sets, additional fan belts, spare electrical components, an entire backup fuel pump assembly, extra engine oil, transmission fluid, hydraulic fluid. They're carrying enough spares to rebuild half the vehicle. The implications settled over Becker like the March cold. German vehicles went into battle with minimal spares, not from oversight but from necessity. Every kilogram of spare parts was a kilogram that couldn't be ammunition or fuel. Yet these Americans moved with such abundance, they could afford to carry redundant systems. Over the following 3 days, The analysis continued. Each discovery deepened Becker's understanding of the chasm that separated German and American industrial capacity. The half-track's electrical system used standardized components, each labeled with part numbers that suggested mass production of interchangeable pieces. The German equivalent used whatever parts were available, requiring mechanics to adapt and improvise constantly. The vehicle's welds were uniform, almost certainly done by automated equipment. German vehicles showed the individual character of different welders, some excellent, others barely adequate. Quality control in American production appeared absolute. On the fourth day, Oberst Friedrich Mannheim arrived from regional headquarters. The colonel had commanded panzer units in Poland and France before staff duties claimed him. His uniform, once immaculate, now showed the careful repairs that marked all German equipment by 1944. He studied the disassembled half-track with the eye of a man who'd sent too many vehicles into battle and watched too few return. "Your report, Hauptmann." Becker had prepared his findings, though writing them had felt like documenting the Reich's slow strangulation. "The vehicle represents industrial capacity we cannot match. The Americans have produced a combat transport that exceeds the specifications of many of our armored vehicles. They've used materials and manufacturing processes that we reserve for our best equipment, and they've apparently done so thousands of times." Mannheim's expression remained neutral. "Quality assessment? Exceptional. No corner cutting. No substitutions. They've used proper steel alloys where we now use whatever is available. The engine will run reliably far longer than comparable German engines. The track system will outlast ours by a factor of 3 or 4. The electrical system is weatherproof to a degree I've never seen." "Weaknesses?" Becker hesitated. Professional honesty demanded the truth. "None that would matter operationally. The vehicle is heavier than necessary by German efficiency standards, but they clearly don't consider weight a constraint. Fuel consumption is high, but they appear to have unlimited fuel. Some systems are redundant, wasteful by our measures, but this makes the vehicle nearly impossible to disable through single-point failures." Mannheim walked slowly around the disassembled components. He stopped at the engine block, placing his hand on the cold metal. "I commanded panzers at Arras in 1940. Do you know what we feared most? Not British armor or French tanks. We feared running out of fuel. We feared mechanical breakdowns with no spare parts. We feared that our supply lines, stretched across Belgium and France, would snap." The colonel's voice remained level, but Becker heard something beneath it, not despair, but recognition. "We won those battles through tactical excellence and operational daring. We compensated for material shortages with superior training and doctrine. But this," Mannheim gestured at the half-track, "this is not something that can be overcome with tactics. This is industrial warfare at a scale we never imagined." Lang had stopped taking notes. Richter stood with a wrench in his hand, forgotten. They all understood what Mannheim was articulating. The Reich's propaganda spoke constantly of German technical superiority, of the quality of German engineering and the valor of German forces. They'd been told American industry produced inferior equipment in quantity over quality. The disassembled half-track told a different story. The Americans had both quantity and quality. They'd built vehicles to standards the Reich could only dream of maintaining, and they'd done it in numbers that suggested those standards were routine, not exceptional. "There's more," Becker said quietly. He opened a folder containing photographs and intelligence summaries. "This is one vehicle. Intelligence indicates the Americans have produced variants of this design for different roles: personnel transport, artillery prime movers, mortar carriers, anti-aircraft platforms. All using the same basic chassis, same engines, same running gear. They've standardized everything." He spread the photographs across a workbench. "They're producing perhaps 15,000 of these vehicles annually, across multiple factories. And this is just one vehicle type among dozens. Their Jeeps alone number in the hundreds of thousands. Their trucks, over 1 million. They're shipping entire armies across the Atlantic, fully equipped, fully supplied." Mannheim studied the photographs in silence. Finally, he spoke. "The Führer tells us the Americans are mongrel people, incapable of organization or discipline, that their Jewish-controlled society is weak and decadent." No one responded. In the warehouse's cold silence, the disassembled American half-track provided its own answer. "Complete your analysis," Mannheim said. "Document everything. I'll forward your report through channels." He paused at the warehouse door. "For what it's worth, Hauptmann, your findings confirm what some of us have suspected for 2 years. We're not fighting an army. We're fighting an entire industrial civilization that has turned its full capacity toward our destruction." After Mannheim left, The mechanics returned to their work with subdued intensity. Becker lit another cigarette, watching them measure and document. He thought of his years at Daimler, of the pride German engineers took in precision and quality. That pride remained justified. German engineering was excellent, but excellence without resources was merely craftsmanship. The Americans had resources beyond comprehension, and they'd applied those resources with systematic thoroughness. They'd built supply chains that spanned oceans. They'd standardized production across continental distances. They'd created redundancy at every level, ensuring their forces never lacked for equipment or supplies. Becker had spent 20 years believing industrial success came from efficiency, from extracting maximum output from minimum input. The Americans had proven a different principle. Sometimes abundance itself was the strategy. When you could afford to over-engineer every component, to carry extra spare parts, to build vehicles that would outlast the war itself, efficiency became irrelevant. That night, in his quarters in a requisitioned farmhouse, Becker wrote his final report. He chose his words carefully, knowing they would be read by men who desperately needed to believe in German superiority. But he couldn't avoid the central conclusion. The half-track represented not just a vehicle but an entire system of industrial warfare that Germany had never developed and could not match. The Reich had conquered Europe through tactical brilliance and operational excellence. They'd compensated for material limitations through superior training and doctrine. But those advantages eroded with every passing month. American factories were producing equipment faster than German forces could destroy it. Every American vehicle lost was replaced by 2 more. Every American unit pushed back returned stronger and better supplied. 3 weeks later, orders came transferring Becker's team to another captured vehicle, an American Sherman tank. The process would repeat. They would disassemble it, analyze it, document the industrial capacity it represented. They would file reports that climbed through channels to staff officers and eventually to high command. Nothing would change. The reports documented a reality that the Reich's leadership couldn't acknowledge without admitting the war was already lost. So the analysis continued, a ritual of scientific precision applied to the question of inevitable defeat. Becker never learned what happened to his half-track report. In the chaos of the collapsing Western Front, most such documents were lost or destroyed. But the vehicle itself remained in his memory with perfect clarity. Every over-engineered component, every wasteful redundancy, every indication of resources so vast that efficiency became irrelevant. He'd spent his career believing engineering was about elegance, about achieving maximum effect with minimum material. The Americans had taught him a different lesson. When you had enough, enough became its own form of excellence. They'd built their vehicles, their armies, their entire war effort on the principle of overwhelming abundance. They'd turned quantity into its own quality, resources into strategy. By summer, American forces rolled through France with mechanical reliability that German commanders found incomprehensible. Their vehicles, built to standards Germany couldn't maintain, simply kept running. When they broke down, spare parts materialized from supply chains that functioned with clockwork precision. Behind every advancing American unit stretched logistics networks of such depth and redundancy that German interdiction efforts barely registered. The half-track Becker had analyzed was one vehicle among hundreds of thousands. Each represented the same industrial philosophy, the same commitment of resources, the same systematic excellence. Together, they formed a mechanical avalanche that no amount of German tactical skill could stop. In the end, the war wasn't decided by courage or tactical brilliance or technical innovation, though all played their roles. It was decided by industrial capacity so vast that a single vehicle could be built with enough quality and redundancy to outlast the conflict itself. It was decided by a nation that could afford to over-engineer every component, to ship entire armies across oceans, to maintain supply lines that stretched around the world. It was decided, Becker finally understood, before the first shot was fired. The moment America's industrial base turned toward war production, the outcome became inevitable. Everything after was merely the slow revelation of that truth, one disassembled vehicle at a time. If you have enjoyed the story, tell YouTube to send you more stories like this by subscribing to this channel, liking the video, and leaving a comment.